right, so the Gala fill would be a constitutional change.
Excuse me?
The Gala fill is a constitutional change. Okay.
Yes.
So, Jerry Benjamin, should upstate expect to see, this is all about population shifts, should upstate expect to see a continued shift of influence in Albany toward downstate legislators? And what does that mean for people in, say, Jamestown?
My view is that the current situation in New York is New York City politicians in New York City fighting New York City politicians in Albany for control of New York City.
Just say that one more time.
The current dominant theme of New York politics is New York City politicians in New York City fighting New York City politicians in Albany for control of New York City.
So upstate politicians.
That is, I think that the agenda of New York is disproportionately driven by New York City concerns. I think that the politics of New York is disproportionately driven by downstate population concentrations. We can see that we have rarely elected statewide leaders in the modern history of the state from anywhere but the downstate area. We've had a few rare exceptions to that, and not at the top of the ticket jobs. That's very germane to me in regard to Gillibrand, which is a whole other conversation. But and I think that it's going to continue as long as we don't renew the economy of upstate. In other words, that has to be, if the economy is renewed, the population will follow. The population, and that's a big reason to be a friend of SUNY, by the way. But
Duly noted, Jerry.
What?
Duly noted.
Right. So yes, that's what I think.
Let me just mention one quick thing. I mean, that's true. The demographics is destiny when it comes to the political power. But again, absent changes, it is, if you believe in one person, one vote, I mean, that's the way the system is ultimately going to be designed. And so unless there's a dramatic change in demographics for the state of New York, the areas where you see the most population growth are in Manhattan and the Hudson Valley. And that is going to be, I think, the driver in terms of political power.
The whole thing is that this is a census year. Jeffrey was talking about undercounted populations.
Let me just add, when I don't work on this, I spend a lot of time on state-federal policy and a big effort on issues like high-speed rail from New York City to Buffalo. But that's not going to happen in the next 12 months. So I just want to repeat my reference to those census websites, because if you are from Jamestown, you can look at the map, you can see that there's one census tract that is underperforming. You know, Jamestown, that is your target, that is your goal, to make sure that the base from which these districts are drawn is as intact as you can start with.
Maybe we could just, Jerry, can you speak to the fact that immigration issues, these undercounted populations, are very important to get the vote out. I mean, this is almost like a Rubik's Cube effect when you try to start redrawing district lines with so many rules. But with a minority majority becoming more and more likely in Manhattan, do you think that, how could it not be correct to have greater representation in Manhattan and fewer representatives in upstate, one person?
Well, first of all, Manhattan is getting whiter, actually.
Manhattan is getting
whiter. Oh, sorry, New York City.
I'm correct about that. It's the
When you
only.
use New York City, I apologize.
Well, you said.
I didn't mean that.
I raised 3 children. I know about that. I mean, but anyway, I think that, as I said when I spoke, there are a large number of uncontrollable dimensions to this. The population growth, the location of population growth, the partisan predisposition of people of new immigrant populations, the one person, one vote standard. I didn't mention it. I rightly was corrected for not mentioning the Voting Rights Act, which was an egregious oversight. So I'm glad that was brought into the conversation. The single-member district kind of obsession, if you want to be provocative. So yes, I think it should be fairly we should have fair representation. So the disproportion of representation in Senate districts that Republicans created for upstate Senate districts and the disproportionate representation that Democrats created for downstate Assembly districts should exist neither in the Senate nor in the Assembly. And I think that competitiveness, as Blair pointed out, could be achieved in more districts. I think that there's a chance for Republican victories, given what I know about Bay Ridge and certain neighborhoods in Queens and so on, and still a chance. We saw a Republican resurgence in the Hudson Valley in the current cycle because of discontent with Democratic elected officials and the Democratic Party in that region. It's a competitive region. So I say I'll roll the dice for competitiveness and fairness, and then say to the Republican Party, mobilize and compete, but not with a stacked deck against one side or the other, or one region or another.
Assemblyman Parment?
The last time we did redistricting in the Assembly, upstate was slated to lose 4 seats to New York City. New York gained 4 seats, as I recall. And after a pretty long battle with my colleagues, I convinced them that they didn't have to take 4 seats from upstate, they could just take 3. And the 4th seat came from Long Island. I'd say Long Island came from Nassau, Suffolk, but it was transferred to Flushing, where we had a responsibility under the Constitution and Voting Rights Act to create a majority district comprised of Asians. So I think in the case of Flushing, it's Chinese ethnic background. And now, for the first time, there is an Asian representative in the New York State legislature because of that. But this whole notion that population does drive destiny is absolutely correct. Upstate will again lose legislative clout because we will lose seats in the next redistricting. There's no way to avoid it and follow the rules. Obviously, before Baker versus Carr, we didn't lose upstate representation because we had malapportionment. 2 speakers of the Assembly came from my district. That will never happen again in my lifetime, I'm sure. And it's because the power goes with the people. The people reside basically south of the Tappan Zee Bridge. But let me just address a couple of the things about population that I think are important. Even within the population, though, shifts in the population have a tendency to drive the plan. This plan for the Assembly was driven principally by a diminishment or a reduction of African Americans in Brooklyn. And you say, well, how could that wind up with Paul Tokaz having a district that was 133,000 people? And remember, Paul Tokaz was the majority leader when we did this. He wound up having to conquer an additional town of about 36,000 people, which was all new to him. And you'd think, well, wait, he's the majority, why don't we cut him a favorable district? Reason? We couldn't really cut him a favorable district and do all the other things that we needed to do. But in the city, the seats are small for 2 reasons. One was to accommodate the Voting Rights Act, and secondarily, it was done because there was a perception that I think is reality that the city population was undercounted. And by, in fact, giving them seats that are as low as 121,000, I think, in the Bronx, which is the low end of the deviation, they, in fact, were more apt to be represented by the actual population that they had in those districts. Now, the other thing that kind of flavors this is that we made a decision to the extent possible not to break county boundaries. And so if you look at the Bronx, I think it's 121. If you look at Brooklyn, it's maybe 123,000. But those districts are all very closely equal in population, in part because of the block-on-border rule, which I mentioned to you before. But the challenge that we had was we could not regress, because of U.S. court cases, from having minority-majority districts for the African-American population that was centered in central Brooklyn. However, the population that was African-American actually moved out of there. I don't know, I guess they call it, people were moving in from Manhattan and buying houses that maybe had 3 families in them and converting to, what do they call it, double income, no kids. And consequently, the dynamic and the demographic changed, and that was what drove that plan. And as the chairman of the redistricting committee, I would have loved to have had 121,000 instead of 126,000 people, because for me, it meant adding additional Republican majority townships to my district. I happen to have one of those districts that Blair thinks is competitive, I guess
It's
probably
true.
it is. But, and I would say that the unhappiness, Blair, is not with the incumbents, because as you pointed out, very seldom the incumbents lose. The public voters are happy with their incumbent. What they're unhappy with is the division in state government, which has been for all of these years a balance between Republicans and Democrats, upstate and downstate, that is not particularly pleasing to anybody, I guess. And I think in the Senate now, we still have such a struggle for control that the public is unhappy with the outcome because there isn't a control. If we had 40 Democrats, I think we'd then have a situation where more people would be happy with the outcome of state government. But at the present time, it's very difficult to make people happy because they're so divided.
You made me happy.
Sounds like it's a challenge to the Senate Democratic map makers now to come up with 40 seats.
We are out of time, unfortunately. Yes, are we out of time? Yes. We are. Okay, so I want to thank everybody who came today. Happy birthday to the league. And thank you very much, I have to say, to Jeffrey Weiss, who filled in at the last minute. I think all of our guys deserve a round of applause.